I used to deliver for Uber Eats while struggling to pay off my student loans, so I was working hard to earn extra cash. At that time, I still lived with my parents. One late night, I was picking up an order from a fast food place in Wilmington, North Carolina, and heading to a house about 20 minutes away. I often took on late night deliveries because the pay was better and traffic was lighter, allowing me to complete more deliveries efficiently. That night, I was leaving the busier part of Wilmington and heading towards the quieter, more rural area filled with forests and farms. The roads were pitch black and there were no other cars around at this hour. I turned off the main road onto a side road marked with a dead-end sign, which was the route given in the delivery directions. The road led me to the last house on this stretch. Almost every house along the road was dark, including the one where I was supposed to deliver the food. It was so dark that I had to keep my car headlights on to see and avoid tripping over anything. I used the flashlight on my phone to navigate to the porch. I'm not exaggerating when I say that there wasn't a single light on anywhere. As I walked to the front door, the overgrown grass brushed against my shins, adding to the eerie feeling. Pressing the doorbell, I didn't hear a chime, so I knocked. The delivery instructions required contact delivery, meaning I had to hand the food directly to the customer. I sent a message to the customer, informing him that I was at the front door and asking him to confirm the address. He read my message immediately and replied, "Give me a second." I replied, "Okay." As I waited in the darkness, scanning the windows of the house for any sign of light, I began to doubt whether I was at the right place. I messaged him again, asking him to type out his address. After a delay, he responded, "I see you. You're at the right house." This was confusing because there were no cars around. I asked him to confirm what kind of car he saw outside, and he replied that he could see my headlights. This confirmed that I was at the correct address, but didn't alleviate the unease I felt. I started to distance myself from the door, not wanting to be right at it when it opened, but the door remained closed. Suspecting a potential scam to get free food, I continued to message the customer, but got no response. Suddenly, I heard a male voice calling from the darkness. I waved my flashlight around, trying to locate the source of the voice. I announced loudly that I was leaving the food on the porch, but I couldn't see anyone. Terrified of being attacked, I walked back to my car without running to avoid drawing attention. When I reached my car, I heard the unmistakable sound of air leaking from a slashed tire. I checked and found that both tires on the left side were slashed. Fearing that the right side tires might be damaged as well, I locked the doors and saw that all 4 tires had low pressure warnings. Panic set in as I debated whether to call the police and wait in the car or run to a nearby house. I decided to leave, turning off my headlights and preparing to exit the car when I saw someone standing outside my window. I screamed in terror when I realized there were at least 4 masked individuals surrounding my car, one at each window. They ordered me to get out of the car, knowing that attempting to drive away with 4 flat tires could get me shot. I asked if they intended to rob me. One of them said that if I gave them everything I had, they would let me go. I agreed and unlocked the door. The moment I did, one of them yanked me out of the car. I was then beaten and kicked by at least 3 of the men, who took my smartwatch, shoes, wallet, phone, and even items from my glove compartment. Once they fled into the darkness, I was left on the ground, eventually blacking out. When I woke up, probably about half an hour later, I was lying on the grass next to my car. They had even stolen my keys. I managed to get up and find the nearest source of light, a small house up the street near the main road. I rang the bell until someone answered and explained that I had been injured and robbed. Fortunately, the woman helped me by letting me use her phone to call the police and roadside assistance to tow my car. I also called my dad. After the police arrived and investigated, they took as much information as I could provide. Once my car was towed, my dad picked me up and took me home. My phone's last location was near the scene, and it hadn't been turned on since, suggesting it was destroyed. The next day, I gave more details to detectives, who traced the Uber Eats account to a person named Logan. It turned out that Logan had allegedly lost his phone and wallet, and whoever found or stole them used them to set up the delivery with the intent to rob me. In the end, the perpetrators got away with their crime. The house where they set up the robbery was a vacant property for sale. While my car tires were covered by insurance, I suffered losses for everything else. This harrowing experience was both painful and expensive, but it taught me a valuable lesson about not being so naive in similar situations. I took a break from deliveries for a few months before returning to doing daytime deliveries. I signed up for Uber Eats in 2021 when it was becoming popular. After being laid off from my previous job and struggling to find new employment quickly, I took a chance on it, hoping it would work out. A few months in, I found that I enjoyed the work and it was providing enough income, so I stuck with it. About a year after starting, I had fallen into the habit of waking up and staying up late, so I didn't begin my shifts until around dinner time. By 11 p.m., I hadn't earned enough for the night, so I kept accepting orders, taking nearly everyone that came through. Around 1 a.m., an order came in from a 24-hour 7-Eleven gas station, which struck me as unusual. I accepted it, though it seemed odd that someone would need groceries from a gas station at that hour. I drove to the mostly empty station, where the only person inside was a friendly older man at the register. After picking up the bag and grabbing a cup of coffee for myself, I headed back to my car. Just as I was getting ready to pull out, I noticed headlights from a car very close behind me, which was strange given the late hour and lack of other traffic. I figured the car must have been parked at the gas station and had just pulled out as I was leaving. I continued driving along the same road, reaching the edge of town, when I suddenly felt something wrong with my car. It became much bumpier, accompanied by a loud scraping noise from the right side. The issue worsened quickly, forcing me to pull over on the shoulder with woods on either side. In the mirror, I saw the same car's headlights slowing down and stopping right behind me. Unsure of their intentions, I decided to get out and check the problem. I wasn't sure if the driver meant to help or had something else in mind. As I ran to the other side of my car, I discovered my right tire was completely flattened. It was bizarre since I hadn't run over anything, and flat tires usually develop gradually. Upon closer inspection, I saw a large gash on the side of the tire that looked unnatural. Then I heard a door open from the car behind me. A man stepped out and waved. I called out that I was okay, hoping he'd leave, but he continued walking towards me. As he approached, I saw he was older, with long grey and black hair, a bushy beard, and dressed in stained and grimy jeans and a hoodie. He asked if he could help with a large smile on his face. I repeated that I was fine, but he just laughed, glancing between the tire and me. After an awkward pause, I lied and said a friend was on the way to pick me up. The man's smile gradually faded, and he started looking around unnaturally. That's when I felt an urgent need to get away from him. I dashed into the nearby woods, hearing him follow briefly before I lost him. I didn't venture far, staying within sight of the road, where I saw the man's figure moving around my car. After a few minutes, he got back into his car and drove away. It became clear that this had been a setup connected to the Uber Eats order. He had likely slashed my tire at the gas station before following me. Despite his real name and details on the app, he didn't anticipate that we would connect the dots back to the order. Fortunately, he didn't harm me, though he did steal some items from my car. I'm sure if I had stayed there, the situation could have ended much worse. It was supposed to be one of my last deliveries of the night. I was working at Leonardo's Pizzeria, and John, one of my bosses, was on the night shift with me. He assigned deliveries and I got a call for a couple of regular pizzas. He handed me a slip of paper with the address and phone number. This was back in 2009, before cell phones had GPS, and I didn't own a Garmin device either. I had to rely on a paper map to navigate. The address was on a street that sounded like Willows Road. I couldn't remember the exact house number or the name on the order, but finding the place was a real challenge. The delivery location was in a very rural area surrounded by woods and farmland, and the lack of streetlights made it even harder. I had to pull over several times to use the interior light to check the map again, which was stressful. Unable to locate the house, I decided to call the number on the slip. The phone rang repeatedly with no answering machine, and it took about 10 rings before someone picked up. When there was no initial response, I said hello. and a deep, soft voice on the other end echoed my greeting. I explained I was the pizza delivery person and was having trouble finding the place. The voice, in a slow, monotone manner, described the driveway as a hard-to-spot dirt trail. Eventually, I found it and drove up the narrow path until a small, one-story house came into view. I parked next to a beat-up pickup truck and walked to the front door, but couldn't find a doorbell, so I knocked. I heard muffled music and footsteps approaching. After a short wait, the door cracked open, revealing only a fraction of a face and one eye peering at me. I asked if he had ordered the pizza, and he confirmed, recognizing his voice from the phone call. There was a strange pause, and I asked if he had the cash. He said yes and went to get it. As he walked away, old 1930s music played in the background, adding to the eerie atmosphere. The door slowly opened wider, revealing a dimly lit interior filled with outdated furniture and a vintage record player. The place smelled like decay. After waiting a bit longer, I knocked again and called inside, asking if he could come to the door. His voice came from another room, asking me to come to the kitchen, remembering my co-worker's advice to avoid entering strangers' homes. I hesitated but went inside. The floor was so old that it sagged under my weight. As I entered, I saw the man from before, who was now standing in the hallway, dancing in a disturbingly peculiar manner. I looked back to the kitchen, still holding the pizzas, and noticed the same man peering around the wall. I asked again if he had the cash, but he only giggled in a creepy, pitchy way, and then called out, "Randall," in a much louder, commanding voice. Unable to handle the situation any longer, I turned and headed for the front door. As I was leaving, I saw the man who had been dancing now standing in the hallway, watching me. I rushed back to my car, still holding the pizzas, and quickly drove away, anxious that someone might follow me. I returned to the pizzeria and called John to explain what had happened. He wasn't angry, but when I shared the story with my colleagues, it seemed almost comical in hindsight. However, it was far from funny at the time. The experience was unsettling, and I was convinced the house was set up for something sinister. Since then, I've avoided entering any homes during deliveries. I'm currently 25 years old, but this story took place when I was 20. I was living in Newark, Delaware, a typically quiet town that becomes much livelier during the college seasons in the fall and spring. Newark is home to the University of Delaware, a well-known school with a reputation for vibrant parties. So when college students are around, the town gets pretty bustling. At the time, I worked as a bicycle delivery guy at Jimmy John's, a job I still hold as I recount this story. The incident happened on a Tuesday or Wednesday night in late April or early May, during my usual 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift. Jimmy John's stays open until 2 a.m. on weekdays and 3 a.m. on weekends, making it one of the few places still open late, drawing in many drunk college students who keep us busy. It can get chaotic, but the high volume of orders often means good tips, so I tolerated the craziness. On this particular night, just before 2 a.m., I received one last delivery. I was annoyed because I was ready to end my shift and get some sleep, but I had no choice but to take it. I knew the street well, as we use bicycles for deliveries to avoid the heavy traffic during college season. I arrived at the house in less than 10 minutes, but no one answered despite my loud knocking. Frustrated, I called the number on the receipt, but there was no response. While I was about to call the store, I heard rustling sounds from some bushes across the street. Initially, I thought it was just the wind, but when I looked, my stomach dropped. A dark figure was crouched behind the bushes, seemingly watching me. Although I couldn't make out any details, I felt a strong sense of dread. I pretended not to notice and kept knocking, but no one answered. The figure remained hidden behind the bushes, and my anxiety grew. I was tempted to go inside the house to avoid the figure, but I was afraid of leaving my bike unattended and unsure if the person was armed. The guy who answered the door eventually came down after trying to wake his roommate, who was passed out drunk. He signed for the order, and I handed it over, eager to leave. As I was about to mount my bike, the man from the bushes suddenly lunged at me. I saw him clearly now. wearing jeans, boots, a black hoodie with the hood up, and possibly a mask, holding what looked like a blade. I knew I had to act quickly. I couldn't turn around because he'd likely catch me, and the surrounding streets all led to dead ends. My only option was to take a nearby bike trail. Despite the trail being unlit and lacking a bike light, I raced onto it, trying to stay alert for any sounds or shadows. Thankfully, the trail wasn't long, and I knew it well. I didn't see the man again and made it back to the store safely. Shaking and hyperventilating, I didn't report the incident to my boss or the police since I didn't get a good look at the man. I packed up my bike, drove home without incident, and never worked another midnight shift. I've since started carrying nunchucks during night shifts. This experience taught me that even in seemingly safe places, anything can happen. I used to deliver Chinese food for a local restaurant when I was in high school. Since I was just a teenager, I knew whatever job I got wouldn't last more than a year or two. This job was pretty typical of many first jobs in retail or food service, with a mix of slow and boring days and busy, stressful ones. As the delivery driver, I was always relieved to avoid the chaos inside the store and deal with customers directly. One Friday night, I started my shift at 6 p.m, working a late 6 to 12 shift. From the moment I clocked in, I was busy delivering orders non-stop for the next 2 hours. By 8 p.m, things had slowed down a bit, but I still had a few deliveries to make before I could take my break. I picked up 3 orders and headed out, planning to finish them before 9. The first delivery was nearby, but the next 2 were further out. This wasn't unusual, as our town is spread out. I reached the second house and dropped off the order, then made my way to the final stop. It was 10 minutes away, and the tag indicated it hadn't been paid for yet. As I drove, all I could think about was the break I'd get afterward. The constant back and forth deliveries had worn me out more than usual that night. When I arrived at the neighborhood, I followed the GPS to a back area where the scene quickly changed. I turned onto a narrow road filled with cracked pavement and potholes, lined with barely visible small houses, hidden behind thick bushes and overgrown lawns. The GPS indicated I had arrived, but I couldn't see a house. After turning on my brights, I faintly saw the outline of a small house far from the road. I noticed a driveway, but it was choked with vines and tall grass. I parked the car and walked through the overgrown driveway, struggling with the tangled vegetation. As I got closer to the house, I saw it was very small, similar to a trailer home, and in poor condition, with vines covering the windows and bushes obscuring the almost decaying structure. Something felt off, but I was just a kid with a first job, worried about losing it. So I pushed my unease aside and knocked on the door. Footsteps approached, and the door opened to reveal a young woman. At first, she appeared normal, which was a relief. But then I realized her neat appearance was unsettlingly out of place given the house's condition. Before I could process this, she opened the screen door and in a chillingly casual tone said, "Come in." Alarmed, I took a few steps back, deciding I needed to leave immediately. Just as I began to leave, I heard a thud from the side of the house. Looking over, I saw 2 men running out from behind the house and heading straight for me through the bushes. I dropped everything and ran, struggling through the thick grass and vines. As I reached the end of the driveway, I tripped and fell, but I quickly got up and made a dash for my car. The men stopped chasing and retreated. Shaking from adrenaline, I drove away as fast as I could. I informed my boss about the incident, who was concerned for my safety and advised me to report it to the police. I was relieved he prioritized my well-being over the order. The police conducted an investigation, but were unable to find the men. The property turned out to be state-owned, and the trespassing sign at the start of the road had been removed and thrown into the tall grass. Their intentions remain unclear, but it seems likely that something nefarious was afoot. I hope no one else has to face a situation like mine, and if they do, I hope they're as fortunate as I was to escape safely. One night, with some spare time on my hands and having had a few coffees earlier, I decided to make some extra cash by doing DoorDash deliveries. It was late, The roads were empty, and the night was unusually peaceful. Every delivery driver's dream. As I was cruising on the highway toward my next delivery, my phone started buzzing. It was the customer calling, but before I could answer, they hung up. Since the call only lasted a couple of seconds, I assumed it was a mistake. Still, just in case, I redialed their number. It rang for a while, but there was no answer. I shrugged it off and continued driving. I exited the highway and drove into a neighborhood with typical average houses. When I arrived at the delivery address, I parked in the driveway and walked up to the porch. As I was about to set down the bag, I noticed the front door was slightly ajar. Unsure if it was intentional, I knocked lightly and called out that I was delivering their food. Suddenly, I heard a disturbing sound from inside the house. A muffled thump that echoed my knocking, like someone was banging on a door. A bit unsettled, I opened the front door wider and called out again, repeating that I was there to deliver their food. After a few quiet moments, a man appeared from the back of the house. He looked visibly distressed, but I couldn't tell if it was due to my presence or something else. The man approached the doorway without speaking and started reaching for the bag. Just then, I heard the thumping sound again from down the hallway. I looked past him, confused, and noticed he turned to look as well. Realizing I heard it too, I asked, "Is everything okay?" The man seemed to struggle with what to do, his expression showing concern or perhaps anger. He then told me, almost in a commanding tone, to bring the food inside. I picked up the bag, but quickly felt uneasy about going inside. I was apprehensive, feeling that if I followed him inside, I might not get out safely. Seeing my hesitation, the man's frustration grew. He snatched the food from my hands and slammed the door in my face. Shocked, I stood there listening as his footsteps faded and the thumping ceased. I hurried back to my car and decided to end my DoorDash shift after that delivery. I reported the unsettling incident to the police, mainly because the man had tried to get me inside his house. Without that factor, I might not have felt there was enough evidence to act on. The police later informed me that the man denied anyone else being in the house and refused their request to search. With no further action possible, we were left to speculate. I believe something sinister was happening, and the man might have had harmful intentions, but we may never know for sure.